a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. It is the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime, especially on a momentous day like the one we just had involving Ellen Greenberg. For those who do not know, 2011, 27-year-old elementary school teacher named Ellen Greenberg. She's found dead in her Manayunk condo, which is a tony little neighborhood outside of Philadelphia, suburban Philadelphia. And the only person around at the time was her fiance. She is stabbed, or found stabbed, I should say, 20 times, 10 to the front, 10 to the very back of her head, back of her neck. According to at least one pathologist, after she had already passed, one of the stab wounds was inflicted post-mortem. Tough to do. And there's been basically a battle going on for 14 years, which cost Josh and Sandy Greenberg around $800,000. After all this time, after all this headache, after all this insanity, on the eve of what was to be jury selection for a lawsuit against 3 defendants who work for the city of Philadelphia, which was supposed to happen this morning. Instead, on Saturday, we get what's known as a verification memo from Dr. Marlon Osbourne saying, hey, you know what? I was a medical examiner, and I concluded that Ellen Greenberg's initial cause of death, manner of death, was a homicide. And then a few months later, I changed it in April to a self-unaliving. And you know what? When I did that, it was a mistake. It was not a self-unaliving. He used the S word, which we don't on YouTube. And today, before we could get to the other defendants in this case, Sam Galino and a detective in the Philadelphia PD, Sam Galino being Dr. Marlon Osbourne's boss at the time, the chief medical examiner, before we could even get to the voir dire process, the selection of jurors, the city of Philadelphia, the attorneys there for these defendants, they relented and said, let's make a deal. And that's where we are today. So what does this mean about making a deal? First off, best guess, you know the professor. I'll go bottom to top. Jo Patuto. She is professor emerita at the University of Nebraska Law School, and an all-around bright legal mind. Next up there, Julia Cowley. She is a retired FBI agent and profiler, spending 22 years in the FBI investigating violent crime, including serial killings and sex offenses, white-collar crime, public corruption, civil rights. She was also a member of the FBI's evidence response team. She's done it all, and she's got a background in science. And she hosts, as you see there, The Consult with Julia Cowley. And last but not least, I finally met this guy in person. He tried to throw me under the bridge. I said he's bigger in person. Told everybody I used the F word with 3 letters that ends in T and has a middle letter A. But let me tell you something. Gavin, and I mean this sincerely, in person, guy's a hunk. He's a handsome man. Great eyes, light, like bluish eyes, tall, and commands a presence.
You make me
Gavin,
blush.
Great to meet you, Gavin. Great to meet you.
Good to be here. Good to meet you too.
Gavin, let me start with you, man. No one's been covering this quite like Gavin. I have to give Stephanie Farr credit at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Did you see? Was she there today? I didn't see her.
I didn't see her. No.
Yeah.
She's the OG though.
Yeah, she's the OG. She is. She started this. And Tom Brennan, the private investigator, even mentioned that, saying that, look, however many years ago, when I took this case on, I called some reporters. He said, we need the media. And really no one answered his call except for Stephanie Farr at the Philadelphia Inquirer. So kudos to her, and kudos to Gavin for jumping on it later on. Gavin, I'm going to leave it wide open. What was your reaction to today? I don't think any of us were quite expecting this. However, let me say, Carm, my mother, predicted this. She told me, you're going to go up there. It's going to be settled. You'll be coming back. Go ahead, Gary.
Karma's wise. I expected a settlement. I did not expect it before voir dire began. We were joking in the hallway. So what happened was we get to the courthouse. They've got a jury panel seated in the courtroom, but the lawyers want to go over some motions before they begin. So we go to a different courtroom. That hearing lasted about an hour. I think, Joel, when we came out, I said, okay, over under 2 days on this.
Yep.
And I had to
under
back real fast. Yeah, way under.
Well, at one point you modified that to 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, yeah. That was something. And it's a process that I really enjoyed watching. You could tell that the city attorneys did not want this to go in front of a jury, and they fought tooth and nail to make sure that it didn't. Ultimately, I think their hand was forced. They had to make a deal.
Next to the legal professor, and then we'll get to the agent here, the FBI agent. But Joe Patuto, I mean, settlements are fairly common. I don't know how many of them take 14 years, but it happened. Let me ask you this. Why do you think that all of a sudden, or seemingly all of a sudden, by the way, my dad, may he rest in peace, used to say there's no such thing as a sudden heart attack. Builds up over time, arteries clog, and this wasn't a sudden settlement. This wasn't a sudden decision, I don't think, from Dr. Marlon Osbourne. It was probably weighing on him for quite a while, and I asked Joe Podraza about that. But why do you think suddenly, after 14 years, on a Saturday, 2 days before a civil lawsuit that was supposed to take place with a jury present to decide, why does he come forward and say, hey, you know what, it wasn't a self-unaliving after all?
Well, I think his professional reputation was about to take an enormous hit because the overwhelming evidence that it could not have been, I hate doing this, YouTube annoys me, but unaliving couldn't have been that, was so overwhelming that I think if he pictured himself getting on the stand and having to answer questions, he would have been excoriated in the press. He would have looked silly. And in addition, there was evidence in this record that he fabricated some information that I think would turn out pretty clearly not to have been true. He said part of the basis for the change that he made from the original report to saying it was murder was because, what was it? It was a consulting pathologist, I don't know what her exact role was, had said it was. And she later came forward and said she never consulted on it. She never talked to anybody about it. And that would not have been a he said, she said, because there were no records that she had ever consulted. She never submitted a bill. The chief medical examiner said she always submitted a report if she did it. So there was, I think, overwhelming evidence that hers was the truthful account. And so here's Osbourne facing not only looking like either a very bad pathologist or someone who was pressured into doing something, plus information that he probably lied in terms of what he based his report on. And so he turned around. He didn't turn around the whole way. He just said, well, I'm just moving it to an undetermined. I'm not going to say anything more than that, nor did he fess up to any of it, because his affidavit or verification letter, whatever they called it, pointed to new information that led him to make the change. So he was still trying to protect his reputation in the middle of it. But, I can't imagine him wanting to get on the stand and try to explain this now that there was also going to be substantial media attention.
Yeah. And by the way, speaking of that, I mean, every major media outlet has now suddenly begun to cover this. Even in court, they taught, not that they didn't do it before, but the Philadelphia Inquirer had a front page story, but the ABCs of the world, the other big networks, they all have producers there present. And, it has now become a certifiable, a verifiable, real deal major media story. And I think now it's going to grow. Thank you to Jody Arrington here, $10 super chat. Look at this. She paid her rent today, has a bit left over. That's very kind of you. Much appreciated. And then we've got a member here. If I can pull it up. Look at this. It's us. I didn't know that. Surviving Survivor. Very, very good. So Julia, to you, one of the interesting things, I'm going to play this in full. We spoke to the defense attorney for the Greenbergs, and he said something to the effect, we'll hear it in a minute, of, now it's time to find the killer or killers. And I think I asked a follow-up, well, how are we going to do that? How are you going to do that? And he said, well, they're going to hopefully be other agencies involved, possibly federal, possibly state, meaning Pennsylvania state troopers. But I didn't expect him to say federal. And I reached out to some FBI friends who said that, the Philadelphia police or Chester County, whoever it is, and it is in the hands of Chester County, they would have to ask for the help of the FBI. But what do you think from a criminal standpoint? It's a long way of me getting there. From a criminal standpoint, investigation, what do you think happens now?
Well, first and foremost, this would not be within the FBI's jurisdiction if it were classified a homicide, because the FBI doesn't typically get involved in state homicide cases unless there's another aspect to the case. Now, at the request of an investigative agency, the FBI can provide assistance. For example, if they wanted assistance from the behavioral analysis unit or profilers could come in and consult on the case. They can ask for assistance with examining digital evidence as well. There's all sorts of things they could ask for assistance for, but the FBI would not be a lead investigator on a case like this, because this would be considered, if it's eventually ruled a homicide, that would be a state case and not within the federal jurisdiction. So now I think there's a number of other hurdles to get over before it becomes a full-fledged investigation. They still need to get the manner of death changed. Now, there's been some great progress toward that. I think at this point, there'll be a review. From my own look at the case, and one of the things, I didn't ever work on this case, but my colleagues and I that do the show, my podcast, we have analyzed this case. So we've reviewed all the records that are available. And of course, we've looked at Gavin's website as well. Thank you for all the work you've done, Gavin. And so I'm very familiar with the case. And I think at the very least, based on our review, at the very least, it should be changed to undetermined. At the very least, at this point, there are too many questions in our minds. And I'm not just, one of the things on our show, we try to cut out all the noise and go, okay, let's just look at what happened. What's the science tell us? And what can we draw from that based on what we're seeing? And there were just too many questions, too many concerns that we had that a lot of people have already noted, but not just anecdotally. We went and we did research. We looked at, well, we didn't do the research, but we looked at the research that's out there, looking at homicidal stabbings versus unaliving stabbing. Sorry to think first. And looking at the characteristics in those types of cases and see which does Ellen's case fit better in. We're looking at probabilities. And in doing so, and looking at everything that we had available to us, at the very least, they need to make this the manner undetermined. That's my opinion. And until they do that, I don't think anything can move forward. or maybe won't move forward until that's officially done. And I hope now, with the former medical examiner changing his opinion and submitting this affidavit, that they will really give that serious thought to doing so.
Let's hope so. So it does get a bit convoluted and a bit confusing. I'll try to clarify it quickly, and then I'm going to have Gavin do a much better job. By the way, Gavin Fish's YouTube channel is Gavin Fish. He keeps it simple. I like it. And he's doing.
I'm not creative.
And he's doing a show at 7:30 tonight. So make sure you tune in 7:30. Gavin Fish. By the way, I had a weird thought. Well, not a thought. I was just thinking. I was like, why didn't he call it fishing for stories or something?
Again, I have no ability for creative thought.
That's all right. That's all right. So, Gavin, correct me if I'm wrong. The way I understand it, Dr. Marlon Osbourne, who again was a medical examiner back then, he basically submits this court-approved document saying, yeah, it was not a self-unaliving, and then says, I can't say it was a homicide, but it was something other than a self-unaliving. So then we get to court, go through this whole process, and there is a settlement today. And the result of the settlement is damages, monetary damages that will be paid to the Greenbergs. That is undisclosed. Now, they spent about $800,000 of their own money. And Josh intimated that it was going to be an amount close to that in order to essentially cover the expenses that they had.
Yeah, it sounded like it was close.
Yeah, it should be a lot more, in my opinion, but that's a whole other story.
I think a jury would have given them much more.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the other part of this is, as part of the agreement, the medical examiner's office in Philadelphia is going to reopen and reinvestigate Ellen Greenberg's case. But as of right now, at 5:19 p.m. Eastern time in Philadelphia, this remains a self-unaliving. So, Gavin, quick question for you. Earlier when we talked to Joe Podraza before the day started, and the Greenbergs, the only thing that they said they would settle for is switching it to either to a homicide or undetermined. So explain how you understand this, because obviously they couldn't change the determination on the spot, but they are promising, as Julia said, to re-examine. But what if they re-examine, I guess, and they find it to be, again, a self-unaliving because there's corruption in Philly? We don't know. What was your take on how this all played out and what it really means?
Well, there were a couple things. I think that Joe made it very clear that he was confident that they were not going to come back saying that Ellen had done it to herself. He talked about he said 4, but I think there are 5 options, right? There's natural death, accident, undetermined, homicide, and then self-harm, let's say. And he's like, how do you come to where Dr. Osbourne came to without some sort of conspiracy to cover up something? He felt very confident, it seemed like to me. When we heard from Josh and Sandy in their little presser there in the hallway, they just feel like the verification that came from Dr. Osbourne was enough for them to be able to tell the world, our daughter did not do this to herself. The medical examiner, the one person who said she did it to herself, now says she did not. And that was enough for them. That's what it sounds like to me.
Interesting. Joe Patuto, let me come to you before I play some of the sound. I mean, kind of the same question, the same thing that Julia raised, and also that I just asked Gavin about. That lawyer was adamant, Joe Podraza, and kudos to him and Will Trask, his partner on this. They said to us in the morning, we're only going to accept an agreement if they switch the death to either undetermined or to a homicide. That didn't happen. I guess my question is, why do you think they accepted it? And I'll tell you that we asked them that, and they said because they have essentially that sworn affidavit from Dr. Marlon Osbourne. But it appears that they, that they decided it was having that was enough, and they didn't need to have the switch in label immediately. And they basically said something to the effect, and Gavin, correct me, we don't even care what they come back with now because we've got this document from Dr. Marlon Osbourne.
Well, I think, two things. One, with the attention now that this has gotten, their ability in the face of all this evidence to say we still think it's an unaliving, I think is off the table. I just think the crescendo of attention that would come and bad media attention that would come is just not possible. The other thing is, I'm not sure they would have had the authority to make that promise. The defendants in the case were all being sued in their individual capacity, which means they were not being sued technically as representatives of the city. There was no representative of the city who was a defendant in the case, at least as I look at the complaint. So I'm not sure they'd have the authority to promise they can do it. What I think they did was promise that that's what they would go back and tell the city. And they may have had some contact with authorities either in the city or at the state level that have already said, you've got our guarantee that that's coming. But I'm just not sure that they were in a position to be able to promise it. I mean, it would be like me, well, not just like me, but, they can't affect the change on their own. They can only promise to try to get it done. And I'm sure that the lawyers thought that was enough given the attention right now. And there's no medical anybody who says it's an unaliving now. I mean, somebody's got to do something because there's nobody is saying that it was an unaliving. So, I mean, it just seems to me you can't leave it where it is.
So very quickly, again, this was a very quickly unfolding morning. This was Sandy walking the halls that never end inside the Philadelphia City Hall hallways where the courthouse is. But this is me just going up to Sandy, and this is before all this news broke.
How you feeling, Sandy? You nervous?
No.
Excited?
Yeah, I am very excited.
Good for you. Happy for you.
Once again, my audio is terrible. I asked her if she's excited.
Listen, do not ever in any competition go against Sandy Greenberg. I'm telling you, she is a wolf, and she's a bulldog. She's amazing.
Yeah, she's awesome. Now, this is Tom Brennan. I want to play because these are people I talked to before any of this happened. And then we got cut off because I think at this point, Josh and Sandy came out. And so people jumped off. But here's Tom Brennan before all this went down. He, by the way, is a private investigator, retired Pennsylvania state trooper. He started the cold case unit at the Pennsylvania with the Pennsylvania state troopers.
So I know you just came up from Florida. You excited, nervous? How you feeling this morning?
Very, very happy. Very, very happy.
How surprised were you to get that verification letter from Dr. Marlon?
Well, it's been a long, 12 years for me. Okay. And I'm happy for Josh and Sandy. And it's so deserved. It's just a shame that, these pangs of conscience didn't appear earlier, and initially I told Josh and Sandy that, they should be extremely, extremely patient because this case will take years and years and years, and they wanted to know why, and I said, you don't realize how corrupt Philadelphia politics are.
Now, some people are talking about a potential settlement. What would have to happen for the Greenbergs to settle with the city of Philadelphia?
What has to happen is they have to change it to either undetermined or homicide. If they don't do that, then we go to trial.
All right, so this was before anything happened today, and you heard them right there. They've got to change it. You just heard the professor say this. Let me finish playing it, and I've got a question for Julia about the re-examination of the case.
And if they do that, Chester County still has a case. Would that mean a criminal investigation is opened? What would happen after this?
Whatever agency has the case, they're obligated to activate it. And what should be done is there's a new attorney general, and that attorney general should assume the case. And with the assistance of the state police. State police have a unit that I started that works cold cases. That's all they do is work cold cases. And that's who should have this case.
And are you confident now that we're getting close to justice for Ellen Greenberg?
Yes, yes.
And there comes Josh and Sandy, which you can't see. So, Julia, to you, again, Ellen found dead in her Manayunk condo 2011. And now, according to this settlement, and I am skeptical just because I don't trust anybody, especially no one in Philadelphia, no offense to Philly. People of Philly are great. I just don't know about the government. So now they are tasked with reopening and reinvestigating from a medical examiner's point of view, Ellen's death. You're a forensic scientist. That's what you did. I think prior to becoming an FBI agent. So where do you start with that? There's been like the degradation of evidence over this time. Maybe things get lost, pieces are missing. What will they do now? Can you kind of walk us through in some detail how they do this?
Well, I'm not sure they can go back, and there's a lot they've lost. It can never be gotten back. But my opinion is at this point, based on what they already have, if you're strictly talking about the medical examiner's office and them reclassifying her manner of death, it's there. I don't think there needs to be any further investigation at this point in the reclassification. Now, moving forward from that, that's where they just need to get to that point. And then, what remains available? Are there other items that could still be tested? Physical items, digital evidence, fully reviewing all the digital evidence that's available. The other thing that in looking at this case that we thought needed to be further developed would be Ellen's victimology. And a big part of her victimology was her relationship with her fiance. And there's very little information known about him and his background and his prior relationships. And so fully developing Ellen's victimology means fully developing her fiance at the time, his life, and everything that was going on in his life at the time. And that was a big gaping hole for us in the records that we had and we reviewed. We just didn't know a lot about him. We had so many questions that needed to be answered about him.
Yeah. It's going to be, in terms of process, Julia, I'm always like anxious to get things done. How long could something like this take? When would you expect the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office to now announce whatever their new finding is, if it is new or if it remains the same? We're talking like 3 months, we're talking 3 weeks, we're talking a year. They're going to take 10 years to do this?
I don't know how long it'll take. Just being in the government, I'd say it would take a long time. However, hearing what Tom Brennan just said and what Gavin had said when we started this broadcast is that the Greenbergs were not going to settle unless there was a promise or an agreement that the medical examiner's office would change the manner of death. So I have to believe that someone made that assertion to them that was going to be done. and hopefully not just a review of it. We don't know all of the details of the settlement and what was promised at this point. At least I don't. So were they just telling the Greenbergs, well, we will review it? Because if I was the Greenbergs, I would say that's not good enough. I don't want another review. I want this changed.
Yeah.
So I have to think that if that promise was made to them and that is part of the settlement, that change will happen sooner rather than later, because there's enough information there to make that change. I think there are enough questions that they don't have to further investigate just to make that change. And I've just been, at the end of looking at this case, I couldn't understand why that change couldn't be made, how simple that would be, just an undetermined, because it is undetermined. There's so many questions. And so what is preventing that? That's the bigger question. What is preventing them from doing that? Now, if they've made that promise to the Greenbergs, hopefully they make that change sooner rather than later. And then a more thorough investigation can be started. And unfortunately, a lot has been lost, and that we will never know, because as you mentioned, I'm a former forensic scientist, processed a lot of crime scenes in my lifetime, and there's just no going back and getting that evidence and having a full picture as to what really occurred in that apartment forensically.
Yeah. I was afraid you were going to say that. Gavin, again, just to reiterate, I mean, my understanding is that there is no promise of making a change, just a promise of re-reviewing the case. And that's where I'm nervous. But again, is that how you see it, Gavin? I just want to...
That's how it was described to us publicly. But I think Julia brings up an important point, that these were private negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
And, they agreed to keep most of that settlement private. There are only a couple things that they decided to share with us publicly. I do think that, I think the main thing with Josh and Sandy, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, the main thing is our daughter did not do this to herself. We want the world to know our daughter did not do this to herself. And once Marlon Osbourne said, yeah, she didn't do it to herself, I think that they were a little more flexible, maybe a little more pliable once they got into those private negotiations. And as far as the forensic, I'm curious what the panel thinks on this, especially Julia, who's been at these crime scenes, what these police officers were thinking that night, just going in there and seeing a woman lying dead on the floor with a knife in her chest that somehow her fiance couldn't see, but there it is. And you couldn't put a neon sign on it and make it more obvious that there was a knife in her chest.
Yeah. I'd like to hear from Julia on that, but first, Gavin, to you, there are a couple of questions. When investigators got there, did Sam Goldberg, the fiance, have no blood or anything on him? How did he pull that off? And then there was a question about fingerprints on the knife. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gavin. Was the knife ever even processed for fingerprints?
The knife wasn't processed. That was one of the things that they wanted in discovery, that Judge Carpenter awarded them, is that they would have the knife processed for DNA and for fingerprints. I don't know the results of that, but that is something that was granted by Judge Carpenter. And I don't think Sam Goldberg had any blood on him. There's no report that says he did. He talked with police a total of 2 times, both times in the presence of an attorney. The second time in the presence of a fine attorney, a very good attorney, and following the advice of his counsel, I'm sure he did not say much. So, yeah, and that second conversation that police had with Sam Goldberg just kind of seemed like, let's do this so that we have a file on it, that we actually talk to him. Let's not actually investigate the matter. Let's just do it so we can tell the Greenbergs that it's been done.
Yeah. Julie, just put this in perspective for us. I mean, this is like a crime scene, not even 101, like whatever is, more basic than that. To go in, you see someone laying there with a 10-inch knife in their chest, and for them to not process fingerprints, not really, literally not investigate, just take a fiance's story at his word, which is what happened. How is this plausible? I mean, obviously people believe that there was a cover up, but from the law enforcement side, in terms of that investigation that day, I don't know how quickly they may have been contacted. I just think there was also a lot of ineptness on their part. Do you agree with me there? I mean, was this
or laziness? I mean, that's something we discussed amongst ourselves when we recorded our episodes, that why, even if they had an idea or thought that maybe she took her own life, you still need to do a proper investigation. You get a search warrant. That all should have been done that night. I mean, one of the questions, somebody, did he have any blood on his clothes? Well, did he change his clothes? Did they search the hamper? Did they look at the in the washing machine or the sinks? They pull the sink traps to see if there are blood. There are so many things. We don't know if he had blood on him because we don't know if he changed his clothes, and they're bloody clothes somewhere there. But back to your point, I'm sorry, I'm trying to not get upset. I mean,
all of us are in the same boat.
Yeah, it's really frustrating as a former forensic scientist. My background is forensics from the beginning. I mean, that's my passion. And I rely heavily on a good crime scene investigation when you're trying to interpret what occurred and what happened between an offender and a victim, or when you're looking at what we would classify this as an equivocal death. But you get there, you secure the scene, you get a search warrant, you conduct a thorough processing of the scene, even if you think maybe she did this to herself. But what I think happened in looking through the records, trying to piece back together, and I think there were maybe two areas where if they hadn't had that information, this might have proceeded differently. First, I don't think anyone knew that she had injuries to the back of her head. And so they didn't move her, they didn't look, but that would be something that you obviously you go into a crime scene and you want to be very careful with what you're touching, but you really do, you need to look at the victim. I think the other thing they're unaware of were the bruisings, because she's probably she's covered. But I think if they saw particularly, so this is what really stood out to me, and this also really stood out to me when I read Dr. Osbourne's deposition, the bruising to her wrists. If they had been aware that there were the bruising, they're not just some bruising that was resolving, but there was a fresh bruise on her wrist, and that to me might indicate controlling wounds, and not necessarily, some people have described them as maybe defensive wounds, perhaps, but I think they could be controlling. You grab someone's wrists. But I think those are the two things. Had they had that information, had they looked and realized, like, they might have proceeded differently. And it doesn't appear in any of the records that I have reviewed. And Gavin, I know you have reviewed probably even more records than I have, but I don't see that the amount of her injuries were noted until autopsy.
And not all of them were noted.
Yeah.
For
Gavin,
example.
How many did you count? Because it was reported that there was 11 bruises. By the way, I don't want to get macabre today, but that is an autopsy photo. And I always ask Josh and Sandy, and they're okay with this. But you see there's one bruise top left on her wrist. And it's tough to tell, but bottom right is her neck. And we'll get into that too. But go ahead, Gavin.
Well, I was just going to say, Dr. Osbourne's report said that there was, it didn't say anything about her neck. And yet there were photos from her autopsy showing hemorrhaging inside her neck, showing bruising on her neck. He noted 11 bruises, he said, in multiple stages of resolution. I counted 59, including some on her face. He didn't, I don't know what was going on with Dr. Osbourne at the time. He did get some discipline from Dr. Gulino over very similar things. Hey, you missed this, you missed that. It did. I think that he was kind of doing just a copy and paste job on his autopsy report, trying to get it out. But yeah, you look at one of the things that really bothered me.
I don't mean to interrupt, but he did, because he admits that in his deposition. Well, that's just standard language. There was a typo in there. And he said in his deposition, oh, that's just our standard language. So you're right. He was cutting and pasting from other documents, I think. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to corroborate what you're saying.
Here's the other thing. Why are there no crime scene photos taken by the PPD? The only photos of the scene were taken by the medical examiner's office. It was as if they said, hey, we don't have a job here. Come on in, Mr. Olszewski, take your 12 photos and let's get out of here. It's cold outside. We need to get home.
Julia, Gavin, let me interrupt you. How's that possible that you've got Philadelphia police respond and they don't take pictures of a scene where someone is dead?
I can't answer the question, Joel. I'm sorry.
Well,
I don't know.
If I can interject, wasn't it bad weather that day?
Yeah.
I think they came in. Here's what, and I'm not, I can't do the science, but in terms of the behaviors, I think they came in, they didn't see the wounds in her back. They didn't look very closely at the body. They talked to the boyfriend. They decide, she did it to herself. Let's get home. The weather's cold, and then they let the family come in the next day and clean everything up, which is what happened. And at that point, when the ME says it looks like something else, they are stuck, because now they've got the negligence they've done at the front end, and they've got a choice of either saying, we really messed up, let's try to fix it, or they start digging a hole for themselves and trying to cover it from there. I don't know if any of you are familiar with because this is what was reminding me of the Dreyfus affair, the Jewish army officer in France. There had been treason, and everybody in the hierarchy of the French military, the military that's so proud and so noble, decided it had to be the outside Jewish officer. And then so they go after him, and then pretty early on, they discover it probably wasn't he. And for the next many years, they start either ignoring or, in fact, fabricating evidence to get him. And I think I'm not suggesting anybody fabricated it here, but I think that's what happened. You got it wrong, and rather than admit that you didn't do it right the first time, you start digging and digging and digging and trying to bury it and figure you're going to be able to get away with it. And it took a lot of years and a lot of work and a lot of dedication from her parents. And Gavin, you following it and doggedly keeping it, in the public domain. And then Joel, you coming on and the science that you were doing, they were wrong that it was going to be able to stay buried. And here's where they are now.
Yeah, thank goodness for that. Peppermint here with a great question. Wasn't there a knife missing? There are reports. Gavin, who issued that report saying that there was 2 knives used, one serrated, one smooth?
I think, the report came from the autopsy report from Osbourne, and I think there were no knives missing that I can see in the crime scene photos. This was a Cutco knife block little set, it was a really nice set of knives. When I look at it, including the knife that was in Ellen's chest, all the knives are there. But in the report, he describes some lacerations as serrated, some of them as smooth, and I honestly think it was another copy paste error. I don't think there was ever a second knife. But
interesting.
You can't.
I agree.
We will never know because as Julia said, the investigation was so poor.
Yeah. And I agree that it's probably one knife used, just statistically, but it was one wound that was described as having some, and I can't recall the exact language, but I think it was in the back of her neck that had some sort of serrated abrasion. Now, it's been my understanding, and based on my experience, it's very difficult when you have a straight on stab wound to tell if you have a serrated knife or a clean edge knife, where you can determine it's serrated if you do have some sort of scraping across the skin, and then you can see the pattern of the serration. Now, there's one wound on the back of her neck that is described that as seeing the serration. So you have the back, and then you have a serrated knife that's found in her front. And so my opinion was just based statistically in the fact that you had some indications that a serrated knife might have been used on her back, and you find it in the front. I ultimately just said it's most likely the same knife that was used. So I don't believe two different knives were used. And I think with Gavin's information about not seeing or ever coming across the fact that a knife was missing, that would again seem to support the fact that it was just one knife used.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of sound interview with the lawyers I'm going to get to in literally less than a minute, and also with Josh and Sandy, and also some more with Tom Brennan. But here, Gavin from PSS, our friend, how do you think pressure from Sam Goldberg's family, now his uncle that appeared there the night of the crime, he's a powerful guy. They're a powerful family still, I believe, in Philadelphia, the Schwartzmans. The question is, will it affect the ultimate outcome in light of this recent change of events, Gavin?
I think, let's see. The only evidence to the contrary is the letter that I received from the Schwartzman and Goldberg family attorney, a man named Jeffrey Johnson, which I think was a big mistake because they gave away a lot of information that is demonstrably untrue. But with that being the only exception, their best course of action is just to remain silent. That is the advice they're going to get from their attorneys, and it's probably the best thing that they can do. I hope criminals are stupid. Like they are demonstrably stupid all the time. So if Mr. Goldberg is the killer here, I go on record as saying number one suspect, but it's possible that it could be somebody else. It could be multiple other people, possibly, right? He would be my number one suspect. But if he was the killer, the best thing that he could do is just shut up.
One last question. I'm going to play the sound, but Julia, to you, and I asked this of Phil Waters, as a homicide detective. He responded over 400 homicide scenes. Scott Duffy, I asked, in your career at the FBI or Breyer, have you ever seen a self-unaliving of a woman or man, for that matter, with this many self-inflicted stab wounds? Have you ever seen that?
No. And I would also add that I have not seen any self-unaliving with somebody stabbing themselves in the back of the neck. And not only have I not seen it, it's also research has shown that that is also very unlikely, and the research in the literature. So that also supports our own experience and what we've seen in our own careers. The research backs that up as well.
Yeah, shout out, by the way, to MG. She knows this story inside out. To be honest, I don't know who she is. I probably should at this point. But she does mention the C3 injury. Specifically, you lose function in all four limbs. She said earlier that Sam had time to take a shower. This is her saying this, that Sam had time to take a shower and then went to the gym, then comes up and basically, in her words, concocts a story. Without further ado, here is Joe Podraza with his partner Will Trask behind him. They came out to us. By the way, Gavin looked at me and said, "Look at these lawyers." And I said, "Yeah, they're just standing in the hall." And it was the adversarial lawyers and the defense attorneys, the plaintiff and the defense. And Gavin said, it looks like they're working on a settlement. And then lo and behold, We got word that they had settled, and here comes Joe Podraza and Will Trask. This is fairly long. I'm going to play the whole thing. Buckle in.
Good news is no more gag, except for certain stuff. My colleague Will Trask, we have resolved the matter. So the litigation as to the Greenbergs and the city, both at the Supreme Court level and here at the trial court level, has been resolved. There will be a review by the medical examiner's office. Hopefully, we hope will be consistent with what Dr. Osbourne just said in his verification. And we proceed forward in getting justice for Ellen. From our vantage point, extremely happy.
What's next?
Well, we'd like to find out who the murderer or murderers of Ellen is/are.
You're at that stage right now.
Yeah, we'd like to go that. Yeah, we're going to pursue that.
So not undetermined? Not undetermined, you want to go right through?
Well, whatever the medical examiner's office says, really doesn't concern me. What did was Dr. Osbourne's verification, which to us and to my clients was worth more than money. And with that, I think now it's the steps forward to bring in the people to justice who are responsible for this homicide.
What's in the scales this morning, Joe? What happened behind closed doors?
Well, a lot of things go into account. Trials, there's a great deal of risk. For one thing, my clients have been fighting this. For them, 14 years. For us, 5 years. There's a lot of costs, a lot of expense, a lot of risks when it comes to appeals. So those factors came in. The consideration by the city, the payment to them was factored in, meaning to my clients, as well as really Dr. Osbourne's verification, which we got pre-trial. That was the thing we've been waiting for now for over 5 years.
So Osbourne settles. What is the city's part of this settlement? What did they agree to do now?
Well, the city will take the manner of death of Ellen and do their own separate examination through the medical examiner's office. So hopefully that'll be a new investigation. All the information that we've acquired over the years will be presented, and I don't see any reason why they wouldn't reach the same result that Dr. Osbourne gave out on Saturday. So that's the first step, and they're supposed to do it expeditiously. And then, they'll pay my clients some money.
Joe, the city is reopening the investigation at this point.
Yes, they've agreed to do that.
The police investigation or the ME investigation?
The ME investigation as to the manner of death, nobody controls the police. They're a separate entity.
But when you talk about finding a killer, that's a police investigation, not an ME investigation.
It can be, but there's not just the Philadelphia Police Department.
Chester County, will they pick it up?
I doubt that, but there are other organizations
Such
that
as?
deal with law enforcement. Federal as well as state.
Joe, a lot of these cases have taken a period of time. Is there any expectation for how long they have or they're committed to?
You ask me that after 5 years of fighting this case and my clients 14 years of looking for justice? No, the answer is no, but I think we've gotten over the major hurdles. The question will be, how receptive will other law enforcement agencies be to pursuing this?
Can you explain why you think Dr. Osbourne suddenly, after 14 years, reverses course on Saturday?
I would like to think that it was a coming to Jesus moment, for lack of a better phrase. Look, I admire that he did it. It took courage. He did it apparently without the knowledge of the other defendants or without the approval of the city. And it was the thing that my clients needed to begin to, get some closure in this matter.
I'm sorry, in a criminal investigation or prior to that, are you planning to depose Dr. Marlon Osbourne to find out why he changed his decision from homicide to undetermined to eventually suicide?
I'm not saying that we would be doing any type of criminal investigation. I think that's going to be left up to either a federal or state agency to make that determination. And to the extent one or more steps forward, they'll have to decide how they do it.
The state agency?
Attorney General's office would be one. There are other district attorney offices that would have jurisdictions such as Chester County, such as Montgomery County. The game of poker in this game changed when Dr. Osbourne said, I think with this evidence here, no, in my professional opinion, This is not a suicide.
Now, you're ruling out the city police department being involved. Why are you doing that?
Because frankly, from our vantage point, they were not very cooperative. They were not very cooperative when Guy DeAndrea, when he was with the district attorney's office back in 2015 through 2017, they did not want to help. And I don't believe that there'll be of much help now. All we got from the police department was video that was seized, all of a sudden no longer exists. So I take that as a great deal of disinterest. And even the officers that we sued in this case did not seem to be open to any type of discussion. So
If this trial had gone forward, would Osbourne have been put on the witness stand as a witness for your team?
yes, that was a condition of him or us settling the matter, would be that he would be called to trial and testify. He would have been likely a hostile witness to us because we would have gone after him as if he had remained a party in the case.
So who initiated settlement talks this morning?
This morning, well, it's not the first time we've had discussions. It just kind of, progressed forward naturally. And after some of the rulings and some of the indications from the bench, you begin.
Did everyone's audio drop there?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why. Let me just take it back a hair, but I've got questions.
So
If this trial had gone forward, would Osbourne have been put on the witness stand as a witness for your team?
yes, that was a condition of him or us settling the matter, would be that he would be called to trial and testify. He would have been likely a hostile witness to us because we would have gone after him as if he had remained a party in the case.
So who initiated settlement talks this morning?
This morning, well, it's not the first time we've had discussions. It just kind of, progressed forward naturally. And after some of the rulings and some of the indications from the bench, you begin.
Why it's cutting out.
Yeah,
Let me
bummer.
Yeah.
hang on. Yep, cut out there. I'm not sure why. I'm going to put that on the Patreon page. If you're a Patreon member, we're going to put the entire unedited version up there. But there are some obvious questions. Before I get to that, I mean, Gavin, when you're at a little gaggle, a little scrum like that, at least after the fact, I always say, I should have asked this question. Is there a question that you wish you asked? Also, what stood out to you the most there?
Okay, well, the answer is the same to both parts of that question. There are two legal battles going on, and they both were settled. And I wondered why they settled the one that's facing the Supreme Court right now, because it's a question that could have settled. It could have set a precedent for a lot of other families had they gone through that whole Supreme Court argument. And I wish that I would have asked a little bit more about that. I was more interested in criminal investigations moving forward, but yeah, both of their cases are now settled. I think that makes it moot at the Supreme Court. I think it goes away from the Supreme Court, and I wish it.
By the way, because not everyone's as up to date as Gavin, but the Supreme Court was supposed to hear this, specifically legal standing of Josh and Sandy to challenge the cause of death by the manner determined by the medical examiner. They have what's known as high immunity. Is that right, Gavin?
Well, what they're seeking in that first one, and Joe, you can jump in anytime on here. They're seeking mandamus, which means they want the court to force the medical examiner's office to change the manner of death. And when the city appealed that, they appealed on the legal doctrine of standing. Do Josh and Sandy have the standing to bring this suit? The appellate court said they don't, and so they appealed to the Supreme Court, who took it. And I really wish that question could be settled.
I'll talk about standing a little, but I think the issue for the lawyers here is their first responsibility is to their clients. And this case has lasted so many years already. And although I'm sure that legal doctrine and wanting to do it for other plaintiffs was something that they didn't dismiss out of hand. Ultimately, their responsibility is to the Greenberg. Standing, we can't, if you don't like something that somebody has done, let's say somebody comes on your neighbor's property and trespasses and cuts down trees and didn't have any right to do it. You can't go into court and sue for your neighbor's injury. The person who's in court has to be the one who suffered the direct injury. That's what standing is. You can't go in and claim somebody else's right. You're not a little attorney general, private attorney general that can do it. And in the case that the Supreme Court was taking, the issue was whether executors of the estate, in the particular circumstances of this case, should have had standing to raise the issue of forcing the ME to change the cause of death on the certificate. That would have, Gavin, been a very narrow holding anyway, as to the way that was framed, because it wouldn't have helped many other defendants. It was really related to how bad the investigation and the conclusions were in this particular case, which may also have weighed into the plaintiff's lawyers deciding, or the Goldbergs deciding not to go forward here. The immunity issue, Joel, is a different issue. And it's very complicated, but I'll do it really, really quick. Before we became a republic, we were part of England. And in England, the king was the country. So the country can't sue the country. So there's official immunity going to the government. We became a republic, but we took that theory of sovereign immunity with us. And so that's another issue that gets in the way of suing, whether it's a state or a city or anybody else. You can sue you can sue the individuals in their personal capacity. That means, Joel, if you were the one who were doing it, I could go after you in your own bank account. What usually happens, and what sounds like it happened here, is the city is going to be willing to subrogate the claim. In other words, to pay the damages for these 3 or 2 defendants and come in and pay, even though the city is not a party. And from some of what you were saying and what I heard the lawyer say, it sounds like that's ultimately what's going to happen here. Because otherwise you may have judgment-proof defendants. It's a Pyrrhic victory. You get the result and you don't get any money.
Well, one of the things
that's why she's the professor. Go ahead, Gavin, real quick. I want you to follow up your point, but here, channeling the heart. I don't know that this is true. There might be an elephant in the room. I read somewhere that Sam's uncle, this is Schwartzman, sits on the police ethics board. Wow.
Sort of, not really. No.
Okay.
He was he's on the board of judicial discipline.
Okay.
Real quick, when it comes to what Joe was just saying, I don't think that that Marlon Osbourne had to come to Jesus. I think what happened is the city said, we're no longer paying for your defense.
Yeah.
And then that's when he was like, okay, well then I guess I need to protect myself here. I think that's what happened.
Money talks. That's a great point. I mean, that's an amazing point. So maybe he's not as holy as Joe Podraza is portraying him. Maybe that's because he's settled. I don't know.
Well, Joe Podraza said he'd like to believe, quote. So I don't think he believes it either.
Joe is a very purposeful speaking person.
Yeah. Thank you to Maureen Gunn here for the super sticker. Julia, to you. And then I'm going to play the sound of Josh and Sandy. I'm going to play that all the way through, because then Tom Brennan gets involved as well. He's got some choice words for the current governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But Julia, to you, in this interview with the attorneys, and again, we'll put the entire raw video up on our Patreon page. Oh, thank you very much. Look at this. Space Coast on the West Coast is an MVP. We've got the rest of that interview. I'm going to come back and play that after I play Josh and Sandy. But Julia, to you, Joe Podraza is asked about this change of the manner of death. And he said, and again, to Gavin's point about using purposeful words, he said, the ME should get to the same result as Dr. Marlon Osbourne, and it should happen expeditiously. Read through the lines, he's basically saying, you better come up with undetermined or homicide, or we're going to take it to the next level. In your experience, what does expeditiously mean? I mean, I sort of asked you that earlier. Again, is that a few months? Is that a year? I don't know. I just don't trust the process because now I'm jaded by everything.
Well, I don't know what he means by that, what expeditious would mean to him, but I think he means probably a matter of weeks or months. They better change this. And now something that's interesting, and I was writing down, analyzing his words, trying to read between the lines. I'm wondering if they haven't developed some evidence, maybe something concrete that they can show a cover up, because that's how you get a federal agency involved. If you can show corruption. And, earlier I was saying, homicide is not within the jurisdiction of the FBI, but if you have another hook, such as cover up, then you can bring in a federal agency. So if they can bring that information that they have, they don't have to be able to prove it. They just have to have some evidence of it. And if they can show that, that might be enough to be the federal hook. Now, I'm thinking of a case from many years ago where it was a suspicious death of a woman. The state had ruled it a self-unaliving, and her family didn't believe it was so. The FBI did get involved, and the hook was insurance fraud. They opened an insurance fraud investigation. So there are ways that the FBI can investigate a homicide. We get involved in organized crime cases and RICO cases. So that's a possibility. As I'm listening to, as Gavin talks about Mr. Podraza and his choice of words, I'm taking that into account. He's very purposeful. So I'm thinking that he might be taking this to a federal agency with the corruption angle of some sort. The other thing that I just want to point out, he's saying the offender or offenders. It would be my opinion, and probably the collective opinion of my colleagues, that there is only one offender. Just statistically, it's by, very probable that it's one offender, not multiple offenders. I'm not aware of anything that I saw in the records that would indicate to me that there would be more than one offender involved in this. But those are just some of the notes that I was taking when he was speaking. It was very interesting talk. I'm going to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, I'll play the back half. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, I was just going to say, I would add that by offenders, he may mean those who participated in the cover-up and not the individual active who was involved in the murder.
That's a good point. The corruption offenders, so to speak, perhaps. Right. Yeah, that's a very good point, Joe.
Julia, I'm just wondering, did you have a chance to read, and I don't have it in front of me, did you read Sam's statement, the fiance's statement to CNN in an article that was published not too long ago?
I love that statement so much.
I did read the statement. It wasn't something we discussed on our show. I do recall it, sort of, but I did read it. Yeah, I saw it.
Okay.
I didn't analyze it. Let's put it that way. I think some things kind of jumped out as okay, but
yeah. Because what struck me in that statement, and we did a show and with it, but he blames Ellen's mental health and mental illness, and obviously talks about himself a lot and how devastated he is. But now it appears that, according to Dr. Marlon Osbourne, it was not her mental health after all. It was not a self-unaliving. So now that statement is problematic. Another quick question, Julia. Chester County, this is confusing because Chester County apparently has it, but in the course of this interview we just saw with Joe Podraza, right away when I mentioned Chester County, you said, I doubt Chester County will take it. So how would this work? I mean, how did they he talked about other law enforcement agencies involved. He didn't tell me this, but I have a feeling they're hoping that it's the Pennsylvania State Police who take over. But why do you think he said so quickly it's not going to be Chester County? I'm sure he's playing 3D chess, but I guess the actual question is, he talks about police also being their own entity. So how is Joe Podraza and the attorneys representing the Greenbergs, how are they going to have any influence, if at all, on which jurisdiction or which agency picks up this criminal investigation? How does that play?
Well, I think I don't know how much influence that they will have. They certainly need to present their cases to these agencies. And, it seems pretty clear that, like you said, he doesn't think Chester County. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure if that's based on conversations they've already had with Chester County or his lack of faith in Chester County. Clearly, there's a lack of faith in the PPD.
Philadelphia.
So I don't know, but I think that he seemed to be somewhat confident someone's going to take the case. So I'm wondering if he's already had conversations either with the state or the feds, perhaps taking on the investigation. There's one thing I just want to say now that you have Dr. Osbourne up there. The other thing, going back to his statement and what we've talked about, having this change of heart. I'm not sure that he had a change of heart. I think probably all along, like, he thought it was homicide to begin with. He was given some information and he changed his opinion. That information, some of that information that was given to him was inaccurate. And that has been known for quite a while. So I think all along, he's probably wrestled with, I still think it's a homicide, but I'm in this, and I don't know if it's ego. I don't know if it's pressure. It's very difficult for high-powered people to admit when they're wrong. And so I just wonder if it just finally, he's just come back full circle to his original opinion. And then I also want to talk about what I think the ME, and back to his deposition, what I thought was the hardest for him to explain, and he would have had to have done this in court, are the bruising and particularly the hemorrhaging in the neck. As Gavin has pointed out, and as you know, Joel, there are many more bruises on her than were documented in the autopsy.
Mm-hmm.
And they're inexplicable to me. And I think that needs to be resolved, but particularly, as I've already pointed out, the ones on her wrists, but the one in her neck, the hemorrhage in her neck, that is not the result of the stab wound. How does that happen? I've heard all various stories. Well, she's active, maybe medication caused her to bruise more easily. I can understand that if these were just on her extremities or her arms or knees or things like that, but you have a hemorrhage in her neck. That does not happen with just bumping into something. And I think those in and of themselves warrant an easy decision to make this undetermined. That hemorrhage in the neck is one of the key injury to me. I know some people think it's the stab wound in the dura of the spine. Some people think it's other wounds, but for me, that one is particularly troubling, and it's inexplicable in a scenario of self-unaliving.
That hemorrhaging is something that I noticed as just a layperson going through the photos. It's like, that is a hemorrhage. And so I called up Tom and I said, am I looking at the front of the neck? Because again, it's kind of a close up, the neck muscles, the straps are up and everything. I did not do well in biology. And so, I have these questions for Tom, and he's like, oh yeah, exactly what you're thinking is what you're seeing, Gavin. And here's Dr. Ross that says the same thing. Here's Dr. Lee who says the same thing. And I really have to give a lot of credit to Josh and Sandy for letting me put that out publicly, because for 12 years it was unknown publicly. They knew it privately, but they let me crop up a photo, zoom in and show the bruising on her neck, show the hemorrhaging inside her neck. And trying to remember the timeline of events, I think that's the one where Sam Goldberg's family started to really get angry at me and reached out.
Mhm.
Mm.
Well, and not only have these other experts that were hired by the Greenbergs confirmed that that was hemorrhaging, so did Dr. Osborne. It's
Mhm.
not in the autopsy, which
It's in his
makes you
deposition.
question. It's in his deposition. He's shown the photograph. He admits that it is hemorrhage, and he says it's due to blunt force trauma. Now, he wouldn't go so far to call it a strangling because there didn't have additional associated damage that you might see, but just because he's not going to call it a strangling, there's only I mean, this is an area that's hard to get to. It's not like something that sticks out. So you have to have something, coming at that area. And,
Well, plus
you
it's
know,
the area that we all know instinctively to protect.
Mhm.
That's the thing about the neck.
yeah. But also it's an area of control, which is similar to the, bruising on the wrists. Those are areas of control. And I know that in autopsies, generally, a medical examiner is not going to say, "Well, that's from control." They're not going to put that kind of opinion on there. But those wounds where they're located need to be considered. And I think when the ME goes back and they really look through everything, not just the autopsy, the original autopsy itself, but Dr. Osborne's deposition, the great questioning of the attorneys on that, because it really told a story, and it told a story of, to me, someone very reluctant to really admit, yes, I believe this to be a homicide. Like it was like really hard. It was painful really to kind of read, because I feel like he knew it all along, but now he's got to stick to this. And I think ultimately he just kind of came around like, I can't stick with this, because this was going to play out the same on the stand as it did in the deposition. Maybe not quite as damaging, because this, just a little more.
Oh, I think it would have been more damaging. I think most lawyers would salivate over the opportunity to cross-examine some of these witnesses. In fact, all three that were left in the case. And Julie, with apologies to you, because I am not a scientist. I did well in science in school, but I certainly didn't go on with it. I think anyone who is not a scientist, on the basis of this evidence, would have absolutely no problem finding this to be a murder and not simply undetermined. And it's not simply the autopsy report, it's all the other information. If this got to a jury in a criminal case, the question as to whether she was killed or not, I think would be an easy checkoff. The issue for whoever discussed prosecution, and I certainly hope it does, is going to be a belief that they have enough evidence to have a good faith view that they can get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt of the person they end up prosecuting. I happen to think there's a lot of information in this record that would point to the individual who reported it, that is her fiance. But whether or not that's where I think the issue is going to be for a criminal trial and for prosecutors looking at it to decide if they can go forward and prosecute. It's not going to be whether it's a murder or not.
Yeah, by the way, there was someone asking, there was a toxicology report, nothing really out of the ordinary there. COE or space, can you pull back up? And I'm going to save the Greenbergs for last. Do we have the back half of the lawyers here?
By the way, Chester
There needs to
County,
be a
when they
change to
took
the
the
death
case, sorry, real
certificate,
quick.
which will either be an amendment.
When Chester County said they're going to keep the case inactive but open, they said that they couldn't reach that bar, right? They have a prosecutorial duty to only bring a case where they feel like they can reach beyond a reasonable doubt, and they obviously couldn't get there. But they did not look at anything from this court case. They did not look at the depositions. They did not look at any of the evidence that has come out since the end of the original police investigation. I think that they can get beyond a reasonable doubt if they just were to look at everything that was gathered while Joe and Will were working on this case on behalf of Josh and Sandy.
I agree. All right, let's play this sound, and then we've got some more to go. Big day.
Or they'll just retract the original one and reissue a new one. I don't know, how they're going to do it.
Joe, I know you can't give the amount of the monetary settlement, but can you talk about the factors that went into calculating it? Like, in terms of what, your argument for setting the amount that you're going to get, that the Greenbergs are going to get?
Sure. It was, well, the main consideration was the cost and expense out of pocket that the clients paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars to date. So that was the main consideration, that they get, a big chunk of that back, if not all of it. And then the reality of the case itself. We were elated with the rulings on Friday from the trial court allowing us to go forward. Frankly, if you had asked me on Thursday night before those rulings, I would have said, I think the case is going to get dismissed. That's really how much of an outlier we are within the law. So there's so much risk in this case, and it could easily have been dismissed. I give a lot of credibility, a big shout out to the First Judicial District for how it's handled a very difficult case, a very emotional case, and devoted a great deal of manpower on their own to get justice. And, it restored my faith in the judicial system. It really did this case.
The settlements say that there were mistakes made 14 years ago, and now, after all of this time, we're going to go back and look at those mistakes.
No, it just simply says that they will revisit the circumstances surrounding Ellen's death and decide whether there needs to be a change to the death certificate. The reason it's framed that way is because nobody can, at this point, under our law, nobody can tell the medical examiner how to rule or say, change it. That individual has that much exclusive power, which shocked me when I first got involved in this case, and has been our fight from the beginning all the way through, and which is the issue, as far as I'm concerned, in front of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court right now. So we couldn't direct and say, you must change this if you want to settle the case, because the blowback from the city was, that's discretion that is in the medical examiner only, and we cannot dictate that.
Osbourne won't be involved, even though he signed the death certificate.
That's
right.
I doubt that he will be involved in the signing of a new or amended death certificate, but he may be consulted. And that's a great question. Maybe ask the Attorney General's office. Did they ever speak with Dr. Osbourne before they said that the suicide should be upheld?
I doubt it. Just for clarification, so
he knows the answer to that
Osbourne
question.
came out and said he changed his opinion from suicide to something undetermined. But now, as it stands at this very moment, again, it is still ruled a suicide pending this review. Because it was my understanding that Josh and Sandy did not want to settle at all unless that happened today. So as of right now, it is still a suicide.
Yeah, we cannot change that because that's the medical examiner's office in its present composition must make that change. Dr. Osbourne's position has been, I'm not with the office anymore. I don't even have the Pennsylvania medical license, so I don't have the authority. We disagreed with that, but we're not going to get to resolution on that issue. We just have to accept that.
Are you worried, though, that they do this review and just come back with the same findings and maybe don't do a proper review?
Frankly, I could care less what the office comes back with. I got Dr. Osbourne's verification. That man is the only person who knows all the circumstances from the beginning to as we stand here today, and he said it's not a suicide, and he made a mistake.
But he didn't say homicide.
No, but a wise judge today pointed out that there are essentially 4 manners of death that you can pick, right? Mm-hmm. And there's accidental, there's suicide, and there's natural causes and homicide. Well, the other 3 don't fit the grade here with Ellen, so maybe Dr. Osbourne wasn't as bold as we wanted him to be, but we accomplished the objective.
Where are the Greenbergs? I thought they would be here.
They are actually.
That's the end of that interview, and they come out, and I'm going to show you the Greenbergs in a minute. But Joe Patuto, I asked him, are you nervous that you're going to get the same ruling from the medical examiner? Again, my mom's a Holocaust survivor. She is openly paranoid, and I inherited that. I don't know that I fully trust the city of Philadelphia, but you heard him say to me, I don't even care, because we've got this thing from Dr. Marlon Osbourne now. But from a legal standpoint, if they come back and still say it is a self-unaliving, is that a problem in terms of opening a criminal investigation, moving it forward, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't think it's going to happen, but yes. But I also think he's signaling to you there that if by some enormous stretch of the imagination, in the face of all the evidence and all the publicity now and what will come, the ME still says it's an unaliving, I think he signaled very clearly they're going to a different prosecutorial authority to take it. Whether it's the feds or the state AG, they'll be moving it somewhere else or attempting to.
Julia, any thoughts on this back half of the attorney speaking? And if not, no worries, because I have more sound to play.
I was just going to say that I'm not sure they secured a promise that they were going to actually change it just based on what he said there. It seems to me, I'm now leaning more toward they said they would review it. That's what I'm gathering, but we'll see.
STS was thank you, Abby. S for ratings, thank you, never relenting and never turning off the spotlight. Yes, for some reason, and I've said this a million times, whenever we do this story, now it's finally getting traction, we get no numbers. And I think Gavin experienced something somewhat similar, but this story is too important. Yeah, to
well, you know what changed today as far as coverage is there is now resolution in the case. That means the media outlets that have been holding off, the big media outlets that have been holding off now, I think are going to do stuff on this case. I think that the pressure that the city has been under by the small media, the new media, the social media, I think it's been meaningful. I think it has moved the needle, but they haven't felt anything yet. If that ME's office come back and says, nope, we agree with Dr. Osbourne's second choice, we're going to keep it as a self-unaliving, the amount of pressure that's going to fall on them from the media is going to be enormous.
And I can tell you, and Gavin can tell you, Dateline and 2020 were both present today with producers. So they are going to be covering this case. Isegal comes to us from Turkey. I've fantasized a world where the patients, students, citizens, and victims are not seen as customers. It's maybe hopefully not supposed to happen, but it does. Just put that up, COE. I'm going to play the Greenbergs. I don't know, I just said Sandberg, but here's the Greenbergs speaking after this settlement.
You weren't happy. Why are you not happy?
Because I don't know what I'm doing sometimes. I'm pleased. We have gotten the main thing, the most important thing that I wanted was the verification by Osbourne that says this was not a suicide. That's our number one thing. There was nothing else as important as that. Anything else we got was whatever, part of the game. But that was number one. And I was prepared to say, whatever money I spent is gone. I don't care about the money. I want Ellen's suicide taken care of. And with that verification, we can go anywhere and say anything we want that Ellen was not a victim of suicide. Now, I don't know, I'm under the impression the city may be doing another exam. I don't know what the purpose of that exam is. I haven't figured it out. But if they should say it was suicide again, we have Galeno Osbourne's verification that it's not. That's detailed.
So we've waited 14 years to get to a place like today. We are very, very, very optimistic for the future. And I'm glad that this is playing out so that everyone can see what we've been through, because it hasn't been an easy road. There have been plenty of sleepless nights. There have been plenty of heartache. There's no Mother's Day. There's no Father's Day. But I hope today we made Ellen proud of us, because we certainly were very proud of her.
We did for
as her
Ellen.
parents.
We did for Ellen what we wanted. She did not commit suicide. There is nobody in the world who can say Ellen committed suicide, and that's the most important thing. There's nothing else more important. I think what it just took our sales out today. This is, it's a big day. Got up early. Stressful day dealing with judges. We don't know what we're dealing with, and we're sad about it. I think in some perverse way, we're sad that it might be over. It's over. We won.
Josh, you're out of pocket for how much money did you spend on this whole investigation and all the lawyers and all the,
Close
suits?
to $800,000.
And no
Close
comment.
to.
And can't tell you.
We're not allowed to discuss.
Can't tell you.
But are you going to be made whole? It seemed like the lawyer said you're going to be made whole for your.
Pretty close.
Okay.
Very close.
Sandy, Joe Podraza was talking about now finding the killer or killers of your daughter Ellen.
I think today we're not going to discuss that yet, but it's not totally over. Maybe that.
How do you do that though? How do you find?
Well,
This is going to play out in the hierarchy in Pennsylvania. That's not our, job to find the killer.
Part of it is everyone that touched this case that continued to say it was suicide now has stains on those fingers. And those stains, may come back to haunt them in some way. You'll hear, I'm sorry, I don't want to deny anything. You'll hear about it. But right now today, it's to discuss that Ellen did not commit suicide, and there's no doubt about it.
And what's next for you guys?
We'll find out something to do. Okay?
Thank you.
It's just, it's sort of like we were here and now we were done. And that slope sort of took some air out of us. Ellen did not commit suicide. That was number one, always was number one. Sandy and I told you that I've already come to grips with the money spent, that I didn't care if we got no money. I can't make any comments about money, but I'm going to tell you that I didn't care. I wanted the suicide thing fixed.
Let me ask you about your continued statement, Ellen, quote, Ellen did not commit suicide.
Correct.
I feel you're speaking to city officials with that.
I'm speaking to the world. I'm speaking to the world. Ellen did not commit suicide. Anybody who wants to read that medical examiner's report or anything, go ahead. She didn't commit suicide. Read the verification. Did you guys ever all of you see the verification?
Letter.
It's kind of explicit, isn't it?
Forgive me if this was already asked, but why do you think that Dr. Osbourne suddenly?
I have no idea.
But the verification statement you referred to, all the items that he lists were things that you and your detective uncovered.
Yes.
The body was moved because of the wrong way buzz. So
Yes.
So you feel vindicated, that
We think, look, we feel, and our lawyers felt, we had evidence and we had a case. That's it.
Okay.
We had evidence.
that you dug up yourself and
Not me personally.
Well, but Tom.
I didn't dig anything up.
Right.
But we had evidence that Ellen did not commit suicide. And the whole thing was bogus. The day that, what's her name, Emery?
Lindsay Emery.
Said that the wounds were post-mortem. We went from
That was
thinking
when
this
she
was...
did her deposition in May of 21.
That's when
And they withheld that information
For
for
2
a year
years.
and a half before that. They knew, the city knew that, or the medical examiner's office knew that, and withheld that from us.
That's when we knew there was a cover-up. That's the day, that's the time, that's the day, the year, the time, whatever you want to call it. We knew there was a cover-up, and they knew we knew.
Sandy, do you think you'll get a little better sleep tonight?
When I get home to Florida and I sleep in my own bed, I'll
Did
be
you ever
the
take a
happiest
test?
person.
Did you ever take a test, and after the test is all gone, you go, we won.
Hey, Josh, on my show the other day, you said that you believe this was actually a strangulation,
Yes.
not a stabbing death.
Yes. I think all those wounds and the deep wounds were a cover-up for strangulation. I think my daughter was strangled. There was a number of things. Number one, her wrists had bruises like this, they had been restrained. The police said there was no, you know what I'm talking about. There was no defensive wounds. Number two, why did she have a gash on the top of her head? Because somebody, this is Tom Brennan, I hope you all know him. He's a very important guy, I think. There was a gash on the top of her head. I think that was when he hit her with a knife, and that's when he changed knives. And then I think he made a phone call. And the phone call told him to make it look like a suicide. Go back and put some stabs wounds in her. None of them are straight. They're like this, like this, like this, all over the place. Then they got on the neck.
I don't think you should.
What?
You should be saying your opinion.
I'm giving my opinion.
You shouldn't. I think maybe not now.
I said what I had to say. Look at the evidence, look at the wounds, and see what you think. I don't think that she was stabbed to death.
Which way are you leaving?
I don't know.
That's that. COE, do we have the bitter end sound there with Tom Brennan? I would like to play that.
Tom doesn't know how to pull punches. His verbal punches, he just does not know how to pull them.
Yes. But I would, oh, this is it. Is this it? This is it. I don't know which one is which though. Let me play this. This is Tom Brennan, the private investigator.
Yeah. What do you mean? If
What's she died? Did she die from death?
Then. Yeah.
there's, those are something. Those are medical questions that, with all the training and everything that I've had, you have to consider everything, and we lost a lot of evidence. Okay, number one, we lost evidence from the body. Okay. Number two, we lost the crime scene because the city gave the property manager permission to clean and sanitize the scene. So we lost a lot of the physical evidence that would have pointed one way or the other. So as a result, we have to work with what we have. And we have autopsy photographs which indicate there were wounds to the neck. And there's, when you do lift the flap, there's hemorrhage here. And myself and Dr. Ross, when we were going through the photographs, identified hemorrhage here, which indicates manual strangulation. Okay. Then you have the two wounds that they investigated. Their expert says they're post-mortem. Okay. Those are the only two wounds that we can talk about. Okay. We can't talk about any of the other wounds. All that evidence is gone. Okay. The only specimen we had to examine was the one that said, it was post-mortem. So we have to go with what we have. And, the possibility of manual strangulation and the risks, they said there was no defensive wounds, okay, on Ellen. Well, when you look at the autopsy report, autopsy photographs, her wrists have been excised and there's damage to both her wrists. There's some cuts on her hands. So those, for anybody to say there are no defensive wounds, they're crazy. It's there in living color.
There are bruises on her hands too.
The wound to the
knuckles.
top of the head. That's an indication of fight or flight. Either Ellen was fighting or she was trying to get away. Okay.
Given all the problems with the evidence you just discussed,
And
what's the possibility of ever finding who did it?
well, you can, there's different things that are available to us now that we can use to get where we have to get. Okay. And, we have all the time in the world. Okay. There is no statute of limitations on homicide. So we have all the time in the world to put together what we need to put together to get there. Okay. And as one police officer told me, won't it be nice, Tom, to just put your hand on somebody's shoulder and say, hey, come with me?
And you think that will happen in this case?
I think there'll come a day when you're going to see that.
How soon?
No, come on.
It's just like everything else, you know. When I met Josh and Sandy, I told them, I said, you're going to have to be extremely patient because this is going to take years. And they said, why? And I said, well, that's Philadelphia. So, you know, all of this, you know, the way it comes about, this is another step towards the finish.
Joe Podraza suggested that maybe the FBI is going to get involved.
Maybe.
You know,
We're not done. Let's just
maybe the FBI will get involved. The Pennsylvania State Police have a unit that I started. Okay, all they do is investigate cold cases. They haven't had the opportunity to look at this. And the state police, they aren't obligated to anybody. You know?
You never know.
You never know. So
It's
you know,
not, but now, I'm sorry,
it
go
is
ahead.
not suicide.
That's right.
So the criminal investigation is on. I don't care what Chester County says. I don't care about the DA. I don't care about Shapiro. Shapiro can kiss my ass. Okay?
Colorful.
For what he didn't do,
Best bite of the year for any story.
he should be kicked out of office, really. But anyway, the politics being aside, I think in time, we'll get where we have to be.
Back to Shapiro for a minute, because I've been very critical of him. What's your take? I mean, obviously you're not a fan. You think it was willful negligence?
No, he should still be a township supervisor. You know?
Explain why, though.
He's a good man. He's a good man. He's a good mouth. He's a good man at, you know, showing up at airplane crashes and stuff like that. But, you know,
But you think he turned a blind eye?
Raising money for campaigns. But, you know, as far as this stuff goes, he should go mind his own business.
You think he turned a blind eye intentionally?
Yes, because the same people that were in the DA's office at the time this occurred were the same people in the Attorney General's office when he got the case. Okay?
Well, they did what he
Jennifer Selber, who is now his chief counsel, was in charge of the prosecution unit in the Philadelphia DA's office when this case came to the DA's office. Okay?
So
that is important.
I love Tom.
If you hear, I don't know how he doesn't. He wouldn't care that I played that, but I mean that's important. There's it's incestuous, and it goes back to Attorney General days for Josh Shapiro, and even before. And if you don't know, James Schwartzman, the uncle of Sam Goldberg, has children that went to school with Josh Shapiro, so they know each other. But Julia, to you, you know, he talks about a cover up. This is your world where they both believe now that there's a strangulation, that the wrists were excised, that he said, if you don't think they're defensive wounds, you're crazy. He says this is criminal. Your reaction to that, you know, that part of the interview?
Well, going back, not only what Tom said, but also what Josh said is that, you know, the another thing I wanted to point out is that incised wound on her scalp. Now, when you have a combination of incised wounds and stab wounds, that is more indicative of homicide. I'm not just saying that because that's what I've seen. I'm saying that because that's what the research out there shows as well. And, you know, I agree with everything that they're saying about the injuries. And I sit here, as I did when we recorded our episodes and we talked through all of the evidence in the autopsy, in the medical results, and I cannot understand how it was ruled the way it was. I don't understand it, but I agree with them. You know, questions about the cover up, now covering up for a family member or the police ineptitude or mistakes they made. I'm not sure the motive of the cover up. It could be multiple motives that involve a cover up. And I mean, that would be part of the investigation. What's the ultimate motive? I think there could be many motives. It is very difficult for law enforcement and to admit when they have made a mistake. It is ingrained in us to just hold on. And the great thing about behavioral analysis and about profiling is that in every single report that we write, we say we could be wrong because we're dealing with human behavior and we don't always have all the information. And so if more information comes to light, our opinions may change. And that's exactly what happened with the medical examiner. He ruled one way, he got additional information which made him rule another way. And now that he has even more additional information and found out that some of the original information he got was inaccurate, he's now ruled again a different way. And so if we build that in to these analyses, that makes it easier to admit when we're wrong. Well, police are not like that. District attorneys are not like that. They don't, it's like pulling teeth sometimes to get people to admit when they're wrong. So when Tom Brennan says this could take a while, this could take a while. This is a very difficult thing. And it's not just about protecting individual people. It's about protecting the reputation of an organization as well. And that becomes very powerful. And a reputation of a person who's part of an organization. Those things are powerful forces. And when you're involved in this kind of community, and I worked in Boston for many years. Boston's very similar to Philly in terms of relationships and how people know each other, and I find it to be very similar. And those relationships are powerful, and they're tough to break from because you go against the grain and then you are out. And being part of the in crowd can be very important for people, or advancing in a career or not losing their career. These become more important than the truth.
What an amazing day here. It looks like we're on the verge of justice here for Ellen Greenberg, something that's been missing for 14 years. Julia Cowley, she is a retired FBI agent and profiler, spending 22 years in the FBI. Do you know our friend Jeff Wood, retired FBI from Boston, Julia?
I do know Jeff.
There you go. Jeff's been on
I've
the show.
known him. We entered the Bureau about a month apart.
Wow. Jeff did a lot of gang work, but obviously Julia is an incredibly bright mind. You sort of just gave it. And I just want to make sure that you realize that you gave it, and I want to give you an opportunity if there's anything else that you want to add as a closing thought as we go around the horn.
Well, my closing thought would be that there are more questions than answers at this point in this case. I realize I see some of the evidence as to why they may have originally thought that she could have taken her own life. But for me, there's more evidence to suggest that she did not, and there needs to be further investigation.
Do you think, Julia, my final question to you, that you heard Tom Brennan say that it's going to feel good to put his hand on someone's shoulder and say, follow me, meaning they apprehend somebody, they've got someone in custody. Do you think we're going to get to that point in this case?
I don't know. I'm pretty an optimistic person because I've seen a lot of things happen in my career. And so I always have hope. And I think, Tom is a longtime investigator. He's probably fairly jaded, and from everything that he's seen. And so
800 investigations.
800. He's in his 80s, and he's super sharp, super nice, and super nice.
I feel if someone like Tom has hope, then that really gives me hope, because he's seen a lot. He's had a lot of disappointment, I'm sure, in his career. And he knows these investigators. He's been there. He started the unit. And if he feels like he thinks like them, and if he thinks he can be the one to show them the way, I have hope that he can.
She is the professor, no Marianne, no Gilligan, but the professor is here, Joe Patuto, Professor Emerita, University of Nebraska. The floor is yours. I guess my question to you, what lesson would you want your law students to take from this case and your final thoughts?
Oh, God. I read the complaint this morning and got so angry, I can't tell you. Let me say a couple of things, and then I will, then I guess I will sort of sum up. I agree with Julie with practically everything she said about reputational interest and all that went on. The only place that I would depart from her is I think she's very kind to the original medical examiner, because what was missing from her exposition was the fact that he didn't do a very good job of the physical examination to begin with. And therefore, from what his findings were, it was not as difficult for him to be pressured into changing his mind. And I think that's what happened. My opinion only. I want to emphasize that criminals are stupid. They are. And if you look at this case with all the stab rooms and everything else, if you wanted to concoct a story to try to exculpate yourself, suicide isn't the one I would go to. I would say, gee, the door was wide open, the balcony, they could have climbed up that. I would have found 1,000 things. Suicide would not have been what I found. Although, they got away with it for a long time. The ultimately, what I'd like to say is every time there is a case, there is a lot of talk about podcasters and what goes on in social media. Creates an environment where people draw conclusions before they should. They make it difficult to have a fair trial. And of course, you can get strident people making comments or writing things, on social media. That's clearly true. We don't live in a perfect world, so not everybody's going to act appropriately. But in this case, you had two parents who were not going to give up, no matter what it costs, no matter how many years. And then you had other people, including Tom, who were willing to come on and tilt at windmills with them. And the lawyers got paid, I understand, but 5 years of tilting at something when you didn't think you were going to be able to win because you thought it was stacked against you is a remarkable thing to be doing. And the publicity, I know, Gavin, you said, little bits of publicity, but it gathered momentum over time. And the fact that people were willing to pay attention and write about it and have programs about it and keep talking about it kept this thing, helped the parents move it forward. And so whatever the criticisms about what social media does in terms of bringing attention and bringing so much media attention on a case that there might not be a fair trial, I think the balance is overwhelmingly the other way in terms of the positive things that you do.
Oh, thank you.
Those are my comments.
That's very, very sweet. Appreciate it very much, especially coming from you. I did fail to mention at the end, shame on me, from Lee T. Is there a link? Where do we find the consult, Julia? And I know you said you're going to be doing some episodes on this case. When are those going to roll out?
So next Wednesday, our first episode will drop. So next week on Ellen Greenberg's case. And you can find us wherever you get podcasts. And we're at the Consult, Real FBI Profilers.
Last but certainly not least, we're about to get to Gavin. But first, if you appreciate the content, please hit that like button. It helps us a lot just to pick up your finger and hit that like button. Please subscribe. As I said before, all these videos and there are a few more will go into our Patreon page, which also goes a long way in supporting us, especially when we hit the road to cover stories like this. Tomorrow night, 7:00, along with Jury Duty Podcast, if I can get back to Miami in time, we are scheduled to interview Gabby Petito's mother. There's a big Netflix documentary coming out on February 17th, and she and her husband, who is Gabby's stepfather, I was actually asked, and I'm humbled to join Jury Duty Podcast. And then they'll be back on our show Thursday to talk about a case involving a woman named Mamta Bhatt, Bhatt, whose body is not recovered. She's been declared dead, and her husband is in custody for murder. And I'll be honest, I don't know much about the case, but Jury Duty Podcast knows everything, and we're going to have them on to discuss that. By the way, I did ask, someone said Josh Greenberg looked very cold, as did I. I asked him which weather he prefers, Philadelphia or Delray Beach, Florida, and he overwhelmingly said it is Florida. No surprise there. I got to say, I do love Philly. I just don't like the politicians, and obviously the rest of PA. I do love Gavin Fish. You were there. You are as cool and nice, much bigger in person than expected, with those dreamy eyes. You get the credit for being on this with Stephanie Farr and others. Really, from the get-go, she is the OG, though, I have to say. Your final thoughts on this historic day where Josh and Sandy get a settlement from the city, the defendants in the city of Philadelphia, and now the tide, it appears, has turned.
Yeah, something occurred to me while we were watching that video of them speaking. Josh and Sandy for 14 years have not been able once to stop and mourn the loss of their daughter. They've talked about it, that they've not been able to do it. They've been fighting this whole time. They talked about, Josh said, you know how you prepare for your test and you're up here and then afterward you come down. It occurred to me that now, at least for the moment, I hope they will be able to properly mourn the loss of their daughter, their only child that they lost 14 years ago and just a few days. I'm extremely, it's not like they need this from me, but I'm extremely proud of them for the grit that they have shown. When you talk about true grit, Josh and Sandy Greenberg are display it remarkably, and they do it with grace. And I don't know, I was really happy to be there to witness that. Really honored that I got to be, in the gallery for that. Yeah. We'll talk about it more on my channel here in about half an hour.
Gavin is doing his own show. Please support Gavin and the Greenbergs by tuning into that. Gavin Fish on YouTube, probably the best name in all of YouTube, because he says, screw it, I don't need a cool title. I'm just going to call the show my name. I wish I had the
That's all I got.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's all you need, man, especially they're saying that a bromance has evolved with those eyes and that mellifluous voice. You're good. And huge thanks to Joe Patuto, Julia Cowley for joining, and Gavin. And again, a huge day. And I think Gavin makes an amazing point, by the way, that they have never really had a chance to mourn the loss of their daughter. And I think that's one of the reasons Josh looked kind of like, he'd been through the ringer today, and not in a bad way, but in like a sense of relief. And so I think they're going to process that. It's been very difficult for them. We're here for them. It is I believe, the beginning of the end here for whomever the killer or killers are. Love you, America. Guys, stick around for 1 second. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care.